Taking a look at the working conditions in a global world survey, which is completed by a unit of the European Union. It takes a look at working conditions in all of the European Union countries, plus a selection of other countries, including the United States, countries in Asia, South America, and elsewhere. The point of this work is to get a comparative sense of the conditions under which people work around the globe and to try to get good data to understand changes taking place in how people work around the globe, and also to help policymakers in the European Union make better law and policy about good and fair and efficient and productive work and work conditions and laws and policy for people in the European Union. These surveys have been done every 5 years since at least the 1970s, with more countries involved each time. Most of the data you're looking at here is from 2015, with some additional research done to it. They're in the midst of collecting a 2020 survey at this point, but those findings would not be out for another year or more at this point. So this is the best data we have. Why am I asking you to take a look at it this week? Well, the idea with this data is to have a sense of ethics and health. We talked about ethics and caring for and making sure to maintain some concern for the well-being of customers, your community, the environment, your employees, your shareholders, your leadership team last week when we talked about ethics and leadership. And this week we're talking about one of the most important aspects of that, which is leadership and the ethics of health, and good workplace environments, creating a safe and healthy place for people to work. One of the important ways to examine the kind of environment you're creating for people you lead is to compare it to other people and places, right? And the farther we go afield for this, sometimes the better perspective we get. It's one thing to compare yourself to what a similar company of a similar size in your own city or sector of business or your own kind of organization is doing to help support employees. But it's more helpful to look at what people in other industries are doing, or smaller companies, bigger companies. But in this case, it's also helpful to see what's happening in other parts of the world. For example, I think a lot of K-12 discussions about what make for good educational practices in the United States fall flat because the comparisons made are usually just to current K-12 practices in the United States in similar environments. When there's a lot of radically different and very innovative and sometimes very useful and realistically possible solutions to educational problems in other cultures around the world that are very, very different. Very, very different ways of funding education, or very, very different styles of when children go to school and for how long, and whether they have homework or not, whether there's sports involved with education or not, things like that. So I've asked you to take a look at the executive summary in order to do the work for this week. And the screencast is just a very brief attempt to talk about a few highlights of what's in the 200-page full version of the report, to give you something to raise some questions about and to help you think about your assignment for the week, which is to write a health policy initiative for a company that you work for or that you fictionally work for. One of the first things I want to talk about is the relationship between work and health. Sometimes we forget how close that relationship is. Early in the report, page 19 of the full report, there's a section reminding people that since the 1970s, after a series of Whitehall studies by the National Health Service and the British government, there's been clear and continuing evidence that stress at work kills people. To put it very bluntly, stress at work kills people. It's a fact. Your actions as a leader can kill people. It's not just about layoffs or bankruptcies, but also harassment, poor treatment of colleagues, etc. Putting people under great stress at work leads to all kinds of cardiac problems, depression, anxiety, and physical illness. And if it doesn't kill them, it leads to deteriorating health, which leads to poor output at work, less creativity, less production, more sick days, uh, less loyalty and support of the company, and just an all around bad environment for everybody involved. Right. Now let's move forward slightly. I want to take a look at the policy relevance of this kind of survey. What's the importance of doing surveys like this? One thing you need to do as a leader is always be looking at what happens in the future, right? And one of the things that they're certainly noting in this survey about work is that work is changing very radically and very quickly, right? This was happening in the last 20 to 30 years and accelerating very quickly in the last 5 or 10 years. And with COVID, it seems to have taken a further lightning leap, right? The idea of work from home, the frequency of people communicating and working from remote places, but still collaborating frequently, people working odd hours, um, people working remotely because of emergencies, um, industries changing radically because of worldwide global health emergencies, um, and also because of, frankly, layoffs and recessions and bankruptcies of companies, right? So there's always new questions to ask. And the questions they're asking in 2020, in the current survey they're doing, are questions about, does flex time work in your industry? Are people still as productive at home as they were in the workplace? Is the idea of flex time fair and equitable for all? Are limits appropriate on when people can shut off at home? Italy, France, and Spain now have laws about this. In France, it's against the law for bosses to contact workers after certain agreed upon hours at home at night. They can't beep them, text them, email them, demand work of them after certain set hours in the workplace. Now, a little further along, we have a great chart here to take a quick look at. It's very important. 7 dimensions of job quality. This is a big part of the entire survey that we're looking at. When they're trying to look at an overall test of how good a setting is for people and their work, they look at physical environment, the intensity of work, working time quality, how long it is, how irregular it is, how flexible it is, the social environment. Do you get along with coworkers, with your management? Are you harassed at work? Skills and discretion, which means do you have latitude to make your own decisions, to make your own schedules? Are there chances to train and develop and get new skills? Are there good prospects for you? Is your employment status safe and steady? Are there career prospects to move up? Do you have job security? Are your earnings and salary good and safe? Right, so these are a variety of things, measures you can consider when thinking about job safety and job quality for those who work for you. Something to think about with these conditions, if these are essentials of a good work environment, is if you're a leader but you can't provide increases in earnings, if you're not in a place financially or you're not in a place of enough power to increase people's salaries dramatically. Are there other things here that you do have control over that you can help people with? Can you do something about the ambient environment? Can you do something about the noise in the office, the temperature? Can you do something about the pace of work and how it's organized? Can you make their work time more flexible? Can you help them with their future job prospects in a better way? Can you make sure they take advantage of every kind of training they could possibly get so that they're ready for future job opportunities? And these are all important things to consider. We'll skip ahead. And take a look at some questions around the issue of work intensity. Work intensity is about where you work and the conditions under which you work. And the data here on work intensity is very clear in saying that the intensity of work kills people and makes them very sick. It's also not very productive for companies. High intensity work with little independence is very counterproductive, they find, right? So jobs where deadlines are short and frequent, where people are working under very high stress, where conditions are very, very competitive, actually lead to very inefficient work and not very productive work for companies. And it leads people to quit the company, quit the industry, leads people to make bad decisions, um, and the intensity leads to a whole range of problems. And it certainly leads to a variety of terrible health problems for people. So the report certainly suggests looking for ways to think about decreasing the intensity of work. Are there things you can do to balance the way work is distributed between employees? Are there ways you can project manage better so that deadlines are more flexible, or that projects don't come up as surprises with short deadlines as often? Those are the kind of questions that come up under work intensity. Okay. Another question that comes up overall has to do with working and emotional demands. These were some rather important findings, I thought, for a lot of leaders to understand, especially on page 25 here under key findings about work intensity and emotional resonance at work. What they found is that increasingly in lots of companies, customers have direct access to more and more employees. Um, that's to say that before the age of social media and mobile phones and websites and company directories and everybody being rated on their customer service CRM, there were very few people who actually were in touch with customers. Now, in most companies, customers are in touch with lots of people in companies all the time. And this EU survey found that as customers have more and more direct access to more and more types of employees and can rate them or contact their supervisors or communicate with them constantly or more severely or more directly, that people are being put under far more pressure. A lot of people's job dissatisfaction and job stress in the survey were directly related to how often their work involves directly working with customers and how often those customers directly are in contact with them. A second finding was that a tremendous amount of pressure, second only to the customers, is the pressure of deadlines and efficiency reports created by software, by technology efficiencies, right? The idea that more and more systems track how quickly we get reports done when we file things, how many counts we close in a day, how many service tickets we complete, right? That software that tracks efficiency and deadlines also creates a tremendous amount of pressure on people, right? And I think we could all think of examples where, while software that creates efficiencies is important and sometimes equitable, it tells us who's working hard and who's working better. It can also sometimes be unjust. Sometimes, say in a call center, the person who's taking less calls per hour may be taking less calls per hour, but completing them with far greater satisfaction from the customer because they're spending a little more time and being more pleasant and making sure the matter is actually completely resolved, right? So things like that put people under a tremendous amount of pressure. All right. Now, um, there are questions about work-life balance and working time that came up. Um, and this could vary quite a bit by culture around the world. Um, by the way, questions about work-life balance definitely showed that people in the United States and the European Union worked far less hours than people anywhere else in the world and were far more likely to disconnect from work after hours than people in other cultures. So conditions were better in the European Union and the United States than they were in Turkey or China or Argentina or lots of other places around the world that were looked at in the surveys. But I thought what would be important for us when we're trying to understand work-life balance in 2020 would be to look at their overall results. What were people looking for from work-life balance? What were the most important things that they found that are critical to people? Um, First was certainly the amount of hours you work, right? People were happiest and said they have work-life balance when they worked less than 48 hours a week, right? So working less was certainly the number one sign that people said they had work-life balance. Second was having a schedule that had regular hours, right? I think this is an increasing concern in our world where there's a lot more flexibility and a lot more demand for instant action, right, in workplaces. That the second thing people really wanted to say they had work life balance was to know that when their workday was over, it was over, right? So they had regular hours. They weren't constantly on call or constantly called in to work at odd hours. Third, very interesting, a close third was a sign of work life balance for many people was the ability to be involved in determining their own work hours. Right? So a close third was getting to have some say in when they worked. Right? And the European Union found that increasingly for all kinds of businesses in a global world where they often work staggered shifts and around the clock, and with technology that allows them to work different kinds of shifts, that more and more companies could be far more responsive to letting more and more employees in a lot of industries, not all, in a lot of industries, work very different shifts that would allow them to balance their lives, right? To balance um, the demands of working with school age children or the demands of getting elderly relatives to senior daycare during the day or to medical appointments and still work a full day, or to divide home care duties with the spouse evenly, right? So these are all very important things. I think these work life balance questions are important for you to consider for this week's project about health and in general, because oftentimes work life balance is where you can provide something to your employees as a leader that doesn't always have to cost you money, right? Um, you can oftentimes be creative and find ways to reward people with a flexibility that will leave them very loyal and very, very happy that they're working for you. Um, I've had this experience several times myself, where I've hired people who've had some very demanding personal schedule problems around raising children or dealing with long term illness in families, where I created an environment that made sure the needs of the office were certainly taken care of, but also gave them some very, very tremendous flexibility to do what they needed to do so long as work got done and the office was covered. And I got paid back tenfold with their loyalty and the fact that they made absolutely sure that their work always got done because they wanted to make sure they could continue to have that flexibility to care for loved ones. It's amazing what people will do and how loyal they will be when you've helped them take care of things like that. Right. The bulk of the report just spells out for individual countries the data on these different points that we've looked at here. So what I'm going to do to wrap things up here is just skip ahead and take a look at some of the concluding matters that they found after looking at all these different countries on all these different markers. Okay. So we saw that box earlier looking at questions about these 7 points of what makes a good workplace. So in conclusion, let's just take a couple minutes to see what their key findings are. The first of those 7 key areas that create a good work environment was physical environment. At its very basic, they found that one simple outcome was that people are sitting far too long, right? That people are developing a lot of very serious physical musculoskeletal injuries from sitting too long. And from sitting too long for too many years, cardiac and weight problems as well. So one of their findings was that this is an increasing problem. People are sitting too long in front of computers, and this is the greatest physical environment problem they could find. Right now, in some industries, the problems are physical danger, working in extreme heat, working in dangerous conditions, right? But increasingly, in a world that's getting safer and safer in most jobs, and where technology is used better and better to create safer work, it's simply a matter of getting people a place to work where they can avoid these kind of repetitive stress and sitting at a desk kind of injuries, right? So that, again, this falls in that neighborhood of what do you do as a leader to help people avoid these very kind of injuries, right? What can we do? Big picture, where do they sit? Do they have to sit? Do they have the right kind of desks or offices? Do they have to be in desks or offices? Can they move around? Is part of the problem that they don't feel like they can really take breaks or move around during the course of the day? Some businesses find that there's work they can do with the right kind of mobile phone and a headset where they can be walking around a track outside or inside an office building and getting some of their work done during meetings, right? So think about physical environment questions. The second marker was work intensity. And that's where we talked about earlier that there's tremendous pressure on employees from customers, students in some businesses, and from data-driven IT processes, right? So it increased, people feel like they're under the microscope at work from customers now, that customers can see everything they're doing, can kind of watch every aspect of what they're doing at work and always reach them directly and criticize their work and put them under great pressure. In the past, your boss was the only one monitoring your work and who knew the status of your work and who could question you about what was going on with your work. But think about today, right? It's easy for a lot of us with so many businesses to check on an order, to check on the status of a project just by looking at a website, right? Whether it's a consultant or somebody shipping us something, we can usually see where that box is, right? Or how close to completion that consulting report is. And in some ways, as a leader, your problem is that the customers have taken some of what used to be your responsibility to project manage things out of your hand, right? Because the customers can um, call and contact and to some degree harass your employees about where projects stand in a way that can be stressful to them and disruptive to your business practices. Um, and you have to think about how are you going to de-escalate that? How are you going to protect your employees so they can work efficiently, and also protect them so that they can also live a decent, healthy life and do their work without being constantly bombarded with questions about, slight delays in projects or having to explain themselves to 4 or 5 different people, say, about a simple process instead of just having the time to complete that process, right? Um, they also talk about work intensity in the sense that it leads to depression, stress, anxiety, and physical illness. They call for more individual and collective autonomy in how work gets done. Right? They feel like one answer to the pressure from customers and data-driven processes is to let people design their own ways of working better. So long as you can track that the work's actually getting done, let people make their own decisions about how work will get done whenever possible. Um, Make sure you have good ways for leaders to hear employees with good innovations on how to change the workplace. Right? A lot of times you need the worker who is stuck in the worst possible position in the company to tell you how to fix that problem, right? How to eliminate the stress from their own uh, their own area. I know I often start performance reviews and meetings with my employees by asking them what's the biggest obstacle or biggest area of stress you've faced this year or this month in your workplace? What is it that's worrying you the most, that's you're losing sleep over? Or what's the greatest obstacle to just doing your day-to-day work, right? To see if it's a piece of technology that's driving them crazy, or a person in another office who's kind of getting in their way, or a process that I can help them to change to make it more efficient, right? You really have to hear it from them to understand what it is you have to do to help them do their job. Right. Next of the 7 key points was working time quality. Um, Here the question was about overwork, so the question about being asked to work too many hours, but also about the right to disconnect, right? The sense that in France, Italy, Spain, and France, Italy, Spain, and being considered in other countries, there's this right to disconnect emerging, right? Which is a law that basically says once you're hired for a job and you have set hours, say they're 9 to 6, your employer is not allowed to contact you to do work outside of 9 to 6 unless it is an absolute emergency. And if they do, they can be fined for it, right? Or you can file a harassment complaint if it's a regular instance, right? I imagine that's a long way off in the United States, but I think a lot of us could certainly imagine where it would be necessary, right? That eventually there has to come a way for people to be able to go home and not have their phone ring from the office and ruin, you know, kids' concerts at school and private time with family and spouses, or quiet time or rest when you want to disconnect from work and relax for a while and forget about what's happening there, right? Working time quality is also, again, about the right to flex schedule and have some say about when you work. The survey results make evident that flex schedules don't just make employees more loyal and engaged, but that flexible schedules are also one of the foremost tools for gender equality in the workplace. Right? This is a big and important driver to understand as a leader. Allowing people to help you design their work schedules is one of the most important ways to create gender equity in the workplace. Um, because women are overwhelmingly um, responsible for care for children and for parents in very unjust and unequal ways at home, and women are far more likely to be single parents than men. The ability to allow women to help design flex time schedules with you is, in many surveys and many studies, the greatest way you can create gender equity in leadership positions and in salaries in your workplace. It's the most powerful tool at your disposal to empower women in the workplace. Next, the social environment. It's interesting that the social environment survey results say 90% of employees are happy with their managers and their coworkers and report no kind of harassment or issues. This is the most positive result of the seven. They like where they're working and who they're working with. But it's just a reminder that even when things are good, you have to constantly review and make sure you're checking on your processes to make clear that everyone understands what a safe and healthy work environment looks like and how to treat people fairly, and that there are processes to adjudicate and punish those who do harass other people. The next pointer is skill use and discretion, which has to do with what are your abilities to use your skills, develop new skills, and receive training and preparation for future jobs at work. The survey says 40% of people globally say they are always included in decisions about setting their own work goals. So that's powerful. Most say they have opportunities to train up and learn new skills formally at work. How about in your place? Do you encourage subordinates to take on every kind of training they're able to take? It's often one of those things you can do um, if you can step back and take a breath instead of worrying about every last thing you can squeeze out of employees. Try to focus on giving them every opportunity you possibly can to train up and learn new technologies, new business processes, and more about other departments in your company. Give them the opportunity to learn, and they can make your unit better. They'll be more loyal, they'll be happier, they'll feel more responsible, they'll feel that they've earned your trust because you're giving them the time off to go learn and train. These are all very important. And again, for gender and racial diversity issues, for equity issues, encouraging people, really pushing people to accept all the possible trainings they could possibly go to is critical to help them move up the ladder. Prospects is the sixth of the 7 pointers. Men and people who work for large companies felt very secure about their prospects of keeping their current position and their ability to move on, move up to other positions, or move to other companies. Women and those doing more like gig work or part time work felt far less secure about future opportunities to move up or move out. Once again, women feel more on the margins and more under threat for losing jobs or not being able to get the next job, the next promotion. So, an area to consider, and consider the ways you can use these other pointers to put women in your workplace in a better situation to not feel that way. The final pointer on what makes people feel good about their workplace is earnings, pay. The survey did find that globally, women continue to earn 66 to 75% of what men make. They did talk about some policy prescriptions that are helping to change that. France and Germany have made some changes that help. France and Germany both have laws now that publicly traded companies have to disclose the salaries of officers to help close the wage gap, the wealth gap, right? So all the officers in the company have to have public salaries listed so that at least people who are stockholders know the difference between what average employees are getting paid and what the people in the executive suite are getting paid. Germany has also passed a law about real pay transparency, radical pay transparency, so that everybody can see what everybody's getting paid. Um, this is especially empowering for women because it allows women in the workplace to see exactly how far behind their male colleagues they are and how underpaid they are, and helps them to advocate better for equal pay for equal work. Um, so these are just some ideas about what's going on out there and what's important to people. I hope this has been helpful to you. Sometimes it's important to step back and see what's going on globally, get some ideas of what concerns people, because what leaders sometimes think are most important to employees is not what's most important to those same employees. Salary is not the biggest driver. People are more concerned about sometimes things like physical environment, about how comfortable their office is, about how much they feel appreciated and have opportunities to do things like get training or be prepared to move up and get promotions. So make sure you're leading by always looking far ahead into the future. If today we're thinking about flex time and new technologies for new ways of work, that's what's happening today. What's going to happen in 5 or 10 years, right? Flex time isn't a future issue. Flex time's right now, right? What comes next? What are the things we have to think about for the future? Consider that as you do your work for the rest of this week. Thanks.